Hello and welcome to The Wire. I'm Sidharth Bhatia.
Thank you. I'll be very glad to be with The Wire.
Yeah. When Selma James speaks, I listen. So said poet Benjamin Zephaniah. For over 6 decades now, Selma James, writer, scholar, and organizer, has campaigned on behalf of unwaged women who are mothers, caregivers, homemakers, and also work outside the house. She has also researched sex workers and organized campaigns in the US, Britain, and Trinidad and Tobago, where her late husband, Marxist scholar and writer CLR James, moved back from England. Now, at the age of 90, Selma James continues to write and campaign. Her new collection of essays is Our Time is Now, Sex, Race, Class, and Caring for People and Planet, where she and others explore many of those three themes that have preoccupied her during her working life. She spoke to The Wire about her book, about her work, and about CLR James, author of the seminal book, Beyond the Boundary, a meditation on family history, class, race, and colonialism, and of course, cricket. Selma James, welcome to The Wire. It is an honor speaking with you.
I'm delighted to be with you. I'm very happy to know you.
So your new book is out in which you revisit some of your old themes, but also discuss some new ideas. How did this come about? I mean, you've maybe edited the book and there are many other writers, but how did this whole project happen?
I'm not only an individual, but part of a campaign, an international network of organizations of mainly grassroots women in Peru, in India, in Thailand, in Ireland, in the US, most importantly in some ways, and in England, where I live, and where is really the base of this international network. We are organizing constantly against the repression of women and against the poverty, especially the poverty and the workload of women. And so our ideas come from what we do, what we organize, who we meet, the events we have, and every once in a while we try to bring it to public attention, because since we're based on grassroots women of every race, it's not very fashionable with the establishment, and we must make our way. We must let people know what we are doing who are not where we are, and to communicate the ideas as well as the experience of that organizing. It's been a tremendously important part of our lives. We've learned so much about ourselves, each other, and about the world in general, and also about capitalist society. You know, women are in a very good position to make judgments about the society, because they're there unnoticed in some ways very often. I remember as a wife, you know, they didn't know that I heard the things they said, and then would talk about them with my husband, because I was only a wife, so they didn't have to bother to screen their views in front of me. That's a very common experience of women. And we've worked very hard to make international connections, because that's the only way really to be anti-racist. If you are only dealing with racism in your own milieu, you are likely not to understand fully how racism and class divisions, and in fact the differences between every sect, you're unlikely really to understand it fully. The more you see the world, the more you connect with other grassroots people, the more you understand, the more you can confront.
So, speaking of sex, race, and class, I found the title of your book quite intriguing. You have brought in sex, race, and class together, but also declared our time is now. Is that a show of optimism or a declaration of intent?
Well, it's both. It says that we have to do something, and it's now that we must do it, because we know what's happening with the climate. We know that we have a short span to save ourselves. On the other hand, we know the repression and the wars and other things which are going on, which destroy life. And at the same time, we see all kinds of struggles, all kinds of ways in which people want to be together. Women want to be together. You have a strike of women internationally now once a year. Some countries, women in many countries participate. We want to be together. We have barriers to being together. We have prejudices and discriminations and racism and all kinds of prejudices. And we fight against those and we organize against those because we want to be together, and we have to be together in order to solve our international problems. There's no other way. There's no savior. There's no particular political party. I don't think there's any political party, in fact, that can give us the leadership and bring us together. We have to do all that work ourselves. Well, women are used to doing all the work. That's what, and now is the time we have to do it, because, and the time is very short, we feel. At the same time, people have made a very big experience and understand a lot of things.
So, as you said, sex, race, and class are closely intertwined. Can some of these issues of discrimination apply to other women of color, even white women?
Discriminations apply to white women for being women. You know, in a country like the UK, rape is practically decriminalized. People are not taking it. Everywhere we don't get equal pay. Everywhere. Everywhere we are the poorer sex. All kinds of cuts have gone down in many countries that had something of a welfare state. It has practically evaporated. We are overworked unbearably. Your figures that you gave in your article, I don't remember exactly, but it was a working day of 15, 16 hours. That's very true in probably most of the world, certainly much of the world. So we have a lot to fight about, whatever race we are. And the problem is for us to be together against the racism that divides us. That's terribly important, but it's also necessary for us to get together, not based either on our age, or rather based on our age, that whatever age we are, we have a contribution to make and a particular struggle that we want to bring to the attention of others. At the same time, men also are organizing in all kinds of ways, and some of them have begun to understand what we're on about and are ready to demand with us that we get an income for the unwaged work that we do everywhere in the world. And these are changes that make me optimistic and which give us some sense of how, or at least who, must come together, and how maybe also how we can come together.
You mentioned about you've seen men also understand finally, maybe not fully the political class, but certainly the many and certainly not the forces of capital, but I think that actually was bringing me to my next question. Do you think that things have somewhat changed from when you began this? Because this is something that's been a major part of your life. You started it at a time when even Marxists were not taking it seriously, because I think theory of productivity did not apply to the women according to them. Excuse me. But have things changed over the years?
They have. The younger men are interested. We have made the case that the caring work in the society is in fact making the society and making, bearing and raising all the children in the world is a job that women do. And some men are interested in doing some part of that. Women who do housework also do field work or do jobs outside the home. And that was supposed to be a liberation when we began in 1972. Many of the left especially, but not only, told us, get a wage for yourself, liberate yourself, leave the home and get a job outside. Well, some people still say that, but everybody knows that the caring work that we have been doing, if we leave the home, we lose that work. We leave that work undone. And that is a crucial crisis that people feel are not being cared for, and that women are exhausted from trying to do the two jobs. That's widely discussed now, and plans are taking in place in all kinds of situations, including in the US Congress at this moment, where a bill about, what's her name, Gwen Moore, a Black congresswoman, is proposing that caregivers are all paid a wage. Now, it's not a glorious sum, but it is a payment for the work that we do. I saw the article that appeared in your journal, that you make the distinction that you can't pay for some of that work, but it's hard work and that should be paid for. And you can't pay for love and you can't pay for the giving that caring is, but you can make it possible that work to go on, and you can get the society to acknowledge how crucial that work is. And that, in fact, is what is crucial in what we are saying. Because what we are proposing is that human beings be the center, human beings and the natural world both be the center of all of the basic decisions of society, rather than the market determining how we live. We humans, in conjunction with the natural world, must decide how we want to live, and the production of the society must be framed, must be organized that suits us rather than imposes itself on us. That's what it means to demand a wage for carers, for the people who reproduce the whole human race. If that becomes the central concern of the society, the focus of society, if the natural world, along with caring for people, caring for the planet, become the central issue of the society, then capitalism is pushed aside. Well, it's not so easy to push it aside. I push it aside, I know that, but this is what the movement is aiming to do. It's aiming to make human beings and the natural world the central perspective, the central concern, the center of the society, rather than peripheral to what we are told is good production for us.
So at the time you must have started, even the old school may not have fully grasped, that's my conjecture, fully grasped what you were saying.
Absolutely right. They didn't see it that way at all. And not only that, but they could not conceive of women having an idea.
Yeah, well, certainly, because if I may say, and I think many of my friends on the left will come down on me heavily for this, is that at one time, certainly in India, there was slightly better. The situation was marginally better, I must say. You may even know about that. But worldwide, women were coming not from the traditional trade union Marxist way of thinking, but the way of, they discovered feminism, which had its own parallel trajectory, which did not need the organized left. So this is what happened at that time. How do you think today's progressives are? At least in the States, many of the progressives who have come forward are women, and worldwide. And there are a lot of young people who call themselves progressive. I think left is somehow a very electrifying word. People are very hesitant to use it in public, certainly in the West in some ways. How do you see these young progressives?
I think their minds are open, and I think they're ready to do things that they hadn't thought of doing before. I think it's quite important that people are now talking about universal basic income. In other words, people see billionaires, and when they see billionaires, they begin to think finally of poor people and of themselves and of the fact that they are really denied, and whole populations are living on the margins, and yet people have the ability to go to the moon or to that nonsense that they're wasting their money on because they have had every thrill and they're trying a new thrill in space. You know, there's a very different view of our entitlement now that has moved in the population in ways that were not predictable. I think part of it also is the climate crisis, where people begin to say, why is this happening? Not only agreeing that it's happening, but asking why and coming to the conclusion that the way we have been living is not only deeply unsatisfactory, but is suicidal. And I think a lot of clarity has come from that. The left is catching up with much that the movement has found out, which is outside of political parties. And I think that's really a quite important change. That's certainly our position in England and in the United States as well. There are not too many people who people feel represent them, and they're finding their own ways to represent themselves. And it's happening very quickly. Each sector is organizing autonomously. You know, that's something that the left did not understand. They did not, their conception of class was narrow. It was largely white, although some people of color will be included. Men in hard hats or on the production line, they did not see, first of all, that housewives were on that metaphorical production line. They did not see us as making the whole working class, for example, and they did not see the struggles that we made possible by backing the men and by making our own struggles as well. I think that has begun to change. This bill in Parliament, for example, says there should be an income for carers within the family and outside, and that students are also entitled to money to study if they don't have any money themselves. That's quite a new view, that people who don't have wages are working. You know, we knew about slavery, but we didn't include, or the left didn't include, women who are working unwaged and keeping the whole society together. And we didn't think that they were working. It didn't cross the minds of the left. Now that is no longer true. We have changed that in our millions, not only the Wages for Housework movement, but many women have made that point in many countries. And we know how much in the global south is dependent, the food production dependent on the women who are, quote, just housewives. So people are being put together. You have to not only cook the food, but you first have to grow it. And it's very often women who are growing that food. And a lot of experience that we've made, and the social media, also the connection with the internet, people have some idea how others are living. They have some idea of what they're thinking and what they're struggling for and how. You know, our Peru network of domestic workers, part of what is called the Wages for Housework campaign, we now call it the Global Women's Strike, but it's really organized by Wages for Housework. They just celebrated getting rid of the man who wanted to, the woman who wanted to steal the election from them. They are determined also not only to win the election, the election that we won, that they won there, but also that they are acknowledged as workers, that they have the rights of workers in spite of the fact that they are, quote, only domestic workers. And they say we're entitled to a wage for the work we do in our homes and in the homes of others. That was relatively new in the last few years, but sex workers are also demanding in Thailand that the government give them some income, because they've shut down the places where thousands of women feed themselves and their families by working in, and they don't have any money to live, and they're demonstrating in their thousands. They're not allowed to demonstrate, so they bring high-heeled shoes to the demonstration to represent the women who could not come because it's illegal to have a big showing. So people are wiser than they were and more organized than they were.
So the sex workers of Thailand reminds me that much of your work has been done with them over the years. I don't know what the situation is elsewhere, but certainly in India, in Mumbai at least, in Bombay, the government did step in and give them some kind of welfare during this pandemic. But of course, their conditions continue to be miserable. And what had happened way back in the 80s was when AIDS hit, they started organizing on their own once they saw people dying. So even now they are, as far as possible, organize themselves, and they have been trying to. It's a hard life. It's in some way a very wretched life, but they, along with some NGOs, have tried to organize themselves, go put their children into some education. So it's possible. I don't know what the situation is in Britain, or for that matter in Trinidad and Tobago. But is that what has happened in Thailand? Is that happening elsewhere?
Sex workers are organized in most countries that I know about, and I hear about that from the English Collective of Prostitutes, who are in touch with sex workers in India and are in touch, of course, with Thailand and with many other countries, sex workers in many other countries. And sex workers have been very important to the working class community because women have had to resort to that to feed their families when there was nothing else to be done. And so it kept families alive. It kept, it made possible for families to go from one country to another to get what they needed. So the sex workers were persecuted, and all women, really a lot of women, I'll tell you about those who don't, a lot of women were very sympathetic to them, and very sympathetic also when we took over a church for 12 days in the 1980s to fight against police, quote, police illegality and racism, because the police would arrest whom they liked, whatever the women were doing. And the women said, no, this is out of the question. We took over a church and we let people know that sex workers were working class, were women fighting for their rights, and were making a better wage than women who were working in factories and sweatshops throughout the world during that time and still today. That is exactly what's happening in so many countries today. You can be in a very low income on the countryside. You come in to get some cash. There are sweatshops waiting for you. In order to escape them, you go into sex work, and you have to grease the palms of a number of people because you're put in a difficult position. But you fight your corner because you're demanding your money, you're demanding a wage, you're demanding the right to live your own life and not be dominated either by the law or by a particular man. This is a way of getting financial independence, which has been terribly important for women for many centuries.
You mentioned that sex workers all over the world were getting organized. Some are in touch with each other. Networks are being built. So something similar happened with, not exactly the same, but something happened even with Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. Do you think that, and people all over the world, the young, even men, even those from privileged backgrounds came out on the streets. This was not happening to them or in their communities necessarily, but they came out because they saw the value of it. Me Too took over. the world in at a certain time. Do you think, firstly, that these are generally positive trends and more of this will be happening in the future?
Well, from what I could see in the UK and somewhat in the US, we have been revolutionized by the Black Lives Matter movement. We know more about what India went through during the Raj than we ever knew. We know more about the slavery than we ever knew. We know more about what happened in China, what happened in Africa, what the slave trade really actually was. We know more about the sailors on the slave ships than we ever knew before. They have and there has been this running battle, which is delightful, because there were slave owners and slave dealers who were heroes and were statues in the centers of cities in the UK, and crowds have gone and thrown them down. And the establishment was very concerned, but most of the population was completely at ease with that. And there was a learning process and a fight against racism in the UK, which we have never seen. And what came from that was that a particular footballer, but a number of footballers who are extremely well paid, have asked that the children have school meals that the government pays for, and the government said no, and they said, okay, we'll pay. And then the government said, yes, we will pay for the children to eat. And that is directly as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement. They were Black footballers, young, gifted, and Black. And they have been heroes to the whole population. There is one whose name escapes me at the moment, who is called the Prime Minister, because they have more respect for him than the man who holds the job. And that's a big education in the UK, when people used to be obeisant in some ways to the establishment. No more. That's gone.
Is it young people led? Are
Yes.
you optimistic about the way young people are getting engaged with social issues?
Well, they are often young people led. Of course, the footballers themselves are young people. So young people are delighted with what they're doing, and delighted with their stand against racism and against poverty. And in terms of the climate, young people, the school children, are way ahead of their parents on that question. And that young woman from Sweden, again, her name escapes me, but you know who I mean. She's astonishing. And she said,
Thunberg.
Yes.
Greta Thunberg, yes.
Yes. And she's led young people, and they're very happy with her. And the establishment is very careful not to insult her in any way, because she is the star. She is the role model for millions of young children. That's who they think is doing the right thing. And that's who they're ready to join to fight for the climate, that is, to fight for the lives of all of us. It's definitely, there is something that young people are ready to take very extreme action, I think, on the question of the climate and against racism. And one of the things that we found out recently is that young Jewish people are beginning to really turn against Israeli apartheid. In fact, the whole idea of Israel as a base for what is called the Jewish nation or whatever, that whole thing is disintegrating. Israel is clearly the country that the West has decided will be kind of their embassy, their ambassadors with their guns, their all kinds of ammunition, all kinds of repression, including the last one that mentioned you in The Guardian as being overheard, and they have access to everything you say and do. I hope they're listening to us now. In fact, it would be useful. They might learn something. The young people have absolutely turned against them, including they're pro-Palestinian, including Jewish young people. And I'm very encouraged by that as a Jewish woman, as a Jewish anti-Zionist woman.
Now coming to, obviously these are extremely evolved thoughts, thinking for many, many years. You were beginning to think on this much later, and then you joined CLR James and then married him. How was it working with him, living with him, talking to him?
He was quite brilliant, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and he made very good jokes, I have to say. But he also was very observant, and he had a wonderful gift of speaking to anyone and getting into serious discussions on who they were, what they knew, and how they were living and how they saw the world very quickly, on a train, in a bus, in a shop, or at a meeting. He was always interested in people, and they were always delighted to be speaking to him because they sensed in him great respect for them, which they didn't always get, especially from men of learning, or women for that matter.
Did you see him? Did he participate? Did he talk to you? Did you see him evolve his thoughts, do his work? And then, of course, he was also an organizer. He was anti-colonialist. Were you both discussing, and he treated you like somebody who also had her independent scholarship and thoughts?
I didn't have independent scholarship. I was a working class woman who had a secondary education. I was accepted at a university, but I decided not to go because I thought it would ruin my mind. I don't know where I learned that from, but I felt people who had university degrees, they didn't talk like us and they didn't think like us. And so we were not joint scholars. He was the scholar and I often asked the questions, but he was very interested always in what I thought and why I thought it. And so I was respected. I was respected for what I knew, especially about women, I have to say, from very early.
You must have seen the book emerge on cricket and
emerge. I typed it about 7 times.
Okay, well, that's more than enough. Emerge, you should get a co-author tag. That really became a rage because West Indies and the Caribbean was going through a lot of anti-colonialism ferment. and it had become then independent. Now they are proud independent countries. But to mix memoir, to mix colonialism, to mix cricket, what do you call it? Do you call it a book on cricket, or do you call it a book on history? Even while you
Well,
were
it
typing.
was semi-biographical,
Yes, of course.
but it was also the portrait of what we had learned in the West Indies during those 4.5, 5 years that we worked, not only with the independence movement. What was most important was that the movement was the movement for federation of all the islands, which failed because of the ambition of the individual politicians. You know the story. It's been true in almost every country, north and south. The ambition of the politicians is what destroys the movement, and therefore the power of the people. We saw it, and we fought it by the end. We had to deal with the people whom we had worked with at first, turning against the movement because they made deals with those who had the power in the society. Almost all did that. A few did not. But by the way, the women's movement is full of that. You know, feminism is a strata of women. Not many women call themselves feminists, who for their thinking and for their acting, they begin with women. I respect that entirely. In that sense, I must consider myself a feminist as well. But when I say feminism, I mean established feminism where women rise in the society and think that the women's movement exists for them to go up. It wasn't formed for that. It was formed for the end of the hierarchy between women and men, and the end of the hierarchy in general, a society which was not ruled from above, and the hierarchical power goes down to the lowest of us. We oppose that, but feminism in the face, as managers, as board members, as members of governments, as millionaires, those women have nothing whatever to do with the grassroots or with any change in society. They are there to move up, and therefore, if necessary, to move us down. And they do it with a female face, giving it a kind of credibility which by now has worn rather thin. This is the society that we're living in now. And the West Indies was, what I saw in the West Indies was exactly that kind of move of those who were inheriting the power of the British government and didn't give two hoots for the population generally. They were revolutionary till they got the power. You know, I have to refer to my favorite politician, who is Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, because his view was that independence was the preliminary goal. It was not the goal, it was the preliminary goal. Once you had independence, you began to use the movement which had won independence to change the world, to make it what the people wanted. He was the only politician, or almost the only politician. There were a few others. I have to count Fidel and Hugo Chavez and a few others. But he, in Africa, did a fantastic job, and I've written about that. And I'm very glad that there's a piece in the present anthology which you're discussing, which gives the introduction to that book about Ujamaa, that is the socialism that was built by Tanzanian people on the land.
Actually, I have seen Africa. I know South Africa rather well, and it's tragic what's happening there at the moment, because many of the people involved are heroes of the revolution and yet turned out to be corrupt. But that's time for that's a subject for an entirely new discussion. Okay, since we were also on the topic of CLR James and you living in Trinidad and Tobago, did you learn to enjoy cricket?
Did he learn?
Did you learn to enjoy?
Oh, well, I have to tell you, when I first landed in England, which was the first time we were going to live together, because he was deported from the US. Technically, he was not, but in fact, he was deported and kept out. And so I had to join him in England. And the first day of the cricket season, he took me to a match. And I saw the bowler for the first time. And I said, "Oh, how beautiful." And he was thrilled because he told me about cricket. He told my little son who came with me. He taught us not only, we used to play cricket with the kids on Hampstead Heath with his little friends. And I loved not only cricket, but I loved the society of cricket. That is, I loved the cricketers, and I loved seeing sports people close up who were dedicated to what they did. They were anxious to have a living, but their major purpose was to play the game. And I love that film, the name of which escapes me, the Indian film about the cricket match. Well, you must remember it. It's a wonderful thing about how the peasants fight the landowners and win.
It's called Lagaan.
Yes, Lagaan. I love that film.
Which means a tax on the peasants.
Yes, this was the opposite of that. It was great. It was a wonderful film, and I've seen it many times and recommended it to many people. I loved the sport. I loved the action. I thought the comparison that CLR made between that sport and dancing and other aspects of art, I thought was absolutely justified and very well said. I like Beyond a Boundary a lot for many reasons.
So you said you were globally networked and organized, and you must have seen what's happening in India. The big farmer strike, actually it's still going on, but attention seems to have gone. And the government is digging its heels in, thinking that the farmers will eventually get fed up. I think anyone who knows Punjab, anyone who knows the farmers of the other states around it should know, or anywhere in India should know that farmers don't give up. They fight the weather, they fight the system, they fight the money lenders. So they're not going to give up easily. What were you getting to know about the farmers' strike? By the way, there was another women's strike earlier to protest against a citizenship bill, mainly, but not solely Muslim women. What did you think of? What did you hear about the farmers' strike, and what did you do about it?
Well, first of all, we found out that the farmers were striking, the farmers and the farm workers were striking to prevent the multinationals, including Monsanto, to be in charge of farmland in India, that enormous country. And we knew that it was a struggle that we all had a stake in. One of our people in the men's group, Payday, a group of men who organize in support of what we do and doing their own work as well, against solitary confinement, against being soldiers, etc. And he was telling us that what was happening in India, what people were fighting against in India, were exactly what had happened to farmers, in fact, in parts of the United States, where the small farmer was pushed to the wall by many forces, and therefore where the question of the food and the tampering with the food and the poisoning of the soil and the whole way in which agriculture was being run was part of the problem with the climate and with the destruction of the natural world and of animals, etc. And so we knew what they were fighting against, and we knew it was in our interest everywhere to support them. So what we thought we should do was, first of all, put out a fact sheet to send to everyone whom we were in touch with, to let them know what the issues were and what the facts were and how much less women got than men in payment as farm workers, and some of the situations that farmers found themselves in, and what the farmers were doing, and what events they had in the strike. We mobilized people to have Twitter storms on the days when the strike was doing something important in strengthening itself and building its movement. And we did and continue to do all that we could as people who are not on the land, but who are in touch with some countries where the majority of the land is being tilled by workers or small farmers in the US in particular, but elsewhere as well, so that we would give them a chance to support the Indian strike, but also to integrate it into whatever else they were doing in their own milieu, in their own country. And we continue to do that and to report exactly, of course, what the women in particular are doing and how the sweatshop workers have used a connection with the strike to make their own case and fight issues where women were molested or raped, to fight those issues within the strike. And we were very struck with how the farm workers, the farmers together in the strike, were able to break the barrier between Muslim and all of the religions, Hindus, Sikhs, etc., where they were working together and working against the racism of the government and the legislation of the government, and in fact the laws of the government that the government had put forward. So the population, millions of people, were finding their way to each other, which must have wide consequences for everything that is happening and will be happening in India, and I'm sure in many other places, especially in Asia.
So in this world now, everyone gets to know more or less everything in their networks, And not only do they have networks, they can instantly communicate solidarity and do something about it rather than
That's
just
right.
this. So that's wonderful. In fact, as I mentioned, Muslim women mainly, but also other women went on a sit-in for over almost 100 days.
Yes, we reported that.
Till the pandemic hit. So there is a sense of citizens not taking it lying down. Now that, whether the government has really, the government has introduced repressive measures, put people in jail, put activists in jail, but still the farmers and the women were unmoved. And that, I think, is a really great thing that has not happened in India for a long, long time. It's been great talking to you, Selma, but I'll end and ask you a final question based on our wonderful discussion. Are you an optimist or a pessimist about the future?
I have to say, in all honesty, my mind is open. When we organize, I am always optimistic that we will win that particular struggle. I know also, because I was trained by CLR James, that what Marx said is true. Revolution comes like a thief in the night, that you never know when the rebellion will come, when people will get it together, when they will see eye to eye for that moment in time when great changes are made. And so I'm always looking for that moment, hoping for that moment, and organizing for that moment. Whether we will win the confrontation which is bound to occur, I don't know. The important thing, however, is to fight for it, to organize for it, to work for it as best we can, and demanding the wealth, that beginning with the wealth that women deserve to have, I think is a good start. And we like that there's a bill in Congress, because if the Americans get something, we'll demand the same wherever we are.
So on that feisty note, if I may say, about winning, and so delightful to see that the spirit is not gone and the fire is very much there.
I hope so.
Selma James, thank you very much for this great conversation with The Wire. May you continue not just to work, but also to write more books.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.